Britt had learned long ago that real terror was not the sharp shock of a gunshot or the sudden screech of tires. It was the slow, suffocating realization that someone had decided you were expendable and that your death had already been penciled into their plans. That realization came in waves the night news broke about Dalton. Professor Dalton, the man whose name was always spoken in guarded tones in hospital corridors and obscure email chains, was dead. An apparent accident, they said at first. A skid on a wet road, a guardrail, an impact. But Britt did not believe in coincidences, not when she knew exactly what Dalton had been involved in and how many powerful people needed him silenced. The moment she saw his picture flash across the screen with the word, "deceased," beneath it, every fragment of classified data, every encrypted file, every whispered meeting curled into a fist of dread in her chest. If Dalton had been eliminated to contain a secret, then the circle of people who knew even a fraction of that secret had just become dangerously small. And Britt was very much inside that shrinking circle. She replayed their last conversation in her mind, Dalton insisting that they were on the verge of a breakthrough, that the protocol would change neurological treatment forever, and that any short-term ethical compromises would be justified by the eventual lives saved. At the time, she had wanted to believe him. She had told herself that the unusual security protocols, the vague funding sources, the sealed sub-basement lab at the edge of town were simply the price of innovation. But then the side effects started showing up in patients who were never supposed to know they were part of anything. Unexplained blackouts. Violent mood swings. Memories that didn't line up with reality. And buried deep in Dalton's private notes, Britt had found references to behavioral alignment and operational compliance, phrases that had nothing to do with healing and everything to do with control. From that moment on, she was no longer a curious collaborator, she was a reluctant witness, someone who understood just enough to be considered a threat. Dalton's death didn't just close a chapter, it tore the cover off the book and left her standing in the wreckage. Every hallway at the hospital suddenly felt watched. Every elevator ride felt like being trapped in a metal coffin with invisible hands tightening around her throat. She began to notice the same unfamiliar orderly passing by too often, the same dark sedan parked too long outside the staff lot. Her paranoia might have been written off as stress if she hadn't had concrete reasons to be afraid. Dalton had hinted, in his more desperate moments, that there were backers who wouldn't tolerate failure or exposure. If those people had just arranged for his silence, Britt knew it was only a matter of time before they turned their gaze to the woman who had handled part of the clinical data, who had seen trial results that could never withstand public scrutiny. Her instincts screamed at her to disappear, to vanish into the anonymous corners of some distant city. But another part of her, the part that had grown tired of cleaning up other people's messes, whispered that running would only confirm her guilt and make her an easier target. She needed someone who understood the language of danger, someone who could act outside the polite rules of hospital ethics and courtroom procedure. That thought led her, inevitably, to Jason Morgan. Jason was not a man she had ever expected to see as a lifeline. Their history was littered with missteps, near misses, and emotional landmines she had long since tried to bury. But he was also the one person she knew who would not flinch at the idea of facing down dangerous puppeteers in the shadows. While others would demand evidence, reports, and assurances, Jason had always operated from instinct, from a code built on loyalty and a brutal clarity about what people were capable of when power and fear collided. For hours Britt fought against the urge to reach out to him, telling herself that she could handle this alone, that involving Jason would only pull him into a storm she had helped create. Yet isolation was starting to feel less like protection and more like a coffin lid inching shut. If Dalton's killers were closing in, remaining silent was no longer noble, it was suicidal. When she finally decided to seek him out, it wasn't a moment of melodramatic resolve but a quiet surrender to the truth. She had information that could get her killed, and Jason was the only one she trusted to carry that weight without breaking. She knew that confiding in him would mean laying bare the entire scope of the project, how it had started as a promising method to stabilize neurological disorders, how the parameters had shifted without her full consent, how the datasets had begun to show patterns that looked less like therapy and more like conditioning. She would have to admit that she had stayed too long, that she had ignored her own misgivings because the science had dazzled her and the praise had felt intoxicating. But she also knew that Jason wouldn't waste time judging her. He would strip the problem down to its essentials. Someone powerful had killed Dalton, Britt was next on the list, and whoever orchestrated this had to be exposed before more lives were claimed or rewritten. While Britt wrestled with fear and the decision to trust Jason, another storm was gathering in a different corner of Port Charles. One that at first glance seemed separate from Dalton's death, but carried its own undertow of lies and danger. Willow was living on borrowed time, not because of a medical prognosis, but because of a legal system poised to crush her under the weight of accusations she could not fully outrun. Out on bail, she moved through each day with the constant awareness that a wrong verdict could lock her away for years. Pentonville was no longer an abstract threat. It was a place she had already tasted, a nightmare that had clung to her skin long after she walked out of its gates. The clang of cells, the suspicious glances from guards, the way the world seemed to forget you existed once those doors closed, those memories shadowed every breath she took. Alexis had taken her case and was fighting fiercely, but reality was unforgiving. Evidence had been stacked, narratives had been spun, and the prosecution seemed confident that Willow could be painted as reckless, duplicitous, even dangerous if that's what it took to secure a conviction. Willow knew that the path to her freedom hinged on more than legal arguments. It hinged on truth cutting through the carefully constructed lies surrounding the night in question. At the center of those lies was Michael's alibi. On paper, it was airtight, time-stamped receipts, digital records, corroborating testimonies. On the surface, it painted him as a man who could not possibly have been where some whispered he truly was. For many, that would have been enough. But Willow had learned to look past polished surfaces. She knew Michael better than most, knew how far he would go to protect the people he loved and the world they had built together. Her belief in him warred with a gnawing suspicion that someone had manipulated the narrative, perhaps even with his reluctant cooperation. It wasn't that she wanted Michael to be guilty of anything, it was that the story as presented didn't align with the uneasy silence in his eyes when certain questions arose. The thought that his alibi might not be organic, that it might be something constructed and handed to him by unseen strategists, haunted her. If his timeline could be dismantled, if the truth of that night could be wrestled out of shadows and brought into the open, it might not only clear her name but also expose a deeper web of influence, one that might stretch farther than anyone imagined. But for that, she needed someone who lived in the overlap between law and justice, someone who could investigate without blinking at the danger of what he might find. That someone was Harrison Chase. Chase came into the situation with divided loyalties and a complicated history with Willow, a history that made every interaction sting with unspoken regret and lingering tenderness. As a detective, he understood the risk of getting emotionally involved, but emotional distance had never been fully possible where Willow was concerned. Seeing her stand in a courtroom, shoulders squared in forced composure while fear flickered behind her eyes, ignited something in him that was both fiercely professional and deeply personal. He wanted to believe that the system would work if he just did his job correctly, but the Dalton aftermath, the political pressures swirling around the city, and the sense that powerful people were shaping outcomes behind closed doors made that belief feel increasingly fragile. When Willow confessed, in a rare moment of raw honesty, that she believed Michael's alibi might not withstand real scrutiny, Chase felt the air shift between them. This was not an accusation born of spite, it was the desperate intuition of someone cornered who had no luxury for comforting illusions. Chase knew how alibis could be manufactured: cameras, accidentally pointed the wrong way, digital logs subtly altered, third-party witnesses coached with just enough truth to make their lies convincing. The more he examined the data surrounding Michael's supposed whereabouts, the more he sensed seams where the edges didn't quite line up. Little inconsistencies, barely visible if you wanted to believe the narrative, became glaring once you allowed yourself to question it. If he pursued this, he could unravel not only the prosecution's case, but also the carefully protected image of a man deeply entwined with Willow's life. Investigating Michael's alibi meant walking into a minefield. It meant risking the wrath of families who had influence, of corporate entities who had reasons to keep certain truths buried, and perhaps even of the same hidden forces that had just arranged Dalton's demise. Yet Chase's conscience wouldn't let him look away. Justice had always been his anchor, even when pursuing it dragged him through emotional wreckage. He told himself that if Michael was truly innocent, a thorough investigation would only vindicate him. But if the alibi had been fabricated, then someone out there was steering events with a chilling level of precision, and that someone might not hesitate to expand their reach from the courtroom to the morgue. As these two storylines advanced on separate tracks, Britt's growing panic over Dalton's death and Willow's fight for her freedom, they began to curve inexorably toward each other. The project Dalton had overseen, the one Britt was so afraid to expose, might hold answers not only about experimental protocols but about the mechanisms used to bend people's behavior, to guide decisions, to rewrite loyalties. If someone had been quietly testing methods of manipulation under the guise of treatment, who was to say that same technology, or the same financial backers, weren't involved in shaping alibis, intimidating witnesses, or nudging juries toward convenient conclusions? Willow's case could be more than a simple prosecution. It could be a test run for how far the system could be pushed without anyone noticing the fingerprints. Jason, if Britt found the courage to tell him everything, would not see these events in isolation. He would look at Dalton's suspicious death, Britt's mounting fear, and the growing irregularities in Willow's trial and recognize the outlines of a larger pattern. Chase's investigation into Michael's alibi could collide with Jason's hunt for Dalton's killers, forcing unlikely alliances and bitter confrontations. Michael, caught between self-preservation, loyalty to those he loves, and the looming possibility that his carefully constructed defense might be a pawn in someone else's game, could become a pivotal figure in both battles. And Britt, no longer just a terrified witness but a keyholder of knowledge, would have to decide whether she was ready to let Jason drag her into a war where truth might not be enough to ensure their survival. In the end, the question hanging over Port Charles would not simply be who killed Professor Dalton, or whether Willow would be convicted, or even whether Michael's alibi would stand. The deeper question would be how much of their lives still belonged to them and how much had already been quietly purchased, manipulated, or rewritten by forces they couldn't see. Britt's fear of becoming the next body in a calculated series of eliminations, and Chase's determination to tear open the seams of a suspicious alibi, were not just personal battles, they were the first tremors of a larger reckoning. As secrets bled into courtrooms and hospital corridors alike, it became clear that survival would not come from denial or blind faith in institutions. It would come from those willing to step into the dark, link their fragile trust, and confront the puppeteers pulling the strings before everyone in their orbit discovered, too late, that they had been living inside someone else's experiment all along.